And as you enter, we'll be recording this session. And we invite you to type an introduction into the chat. We'll also, as we move to the next slide, go over, as you probably know more about Zoom protocols than you ever thought you would. You can just, if you could just mute your voice, that would be great, and type into the chat at any time. And please just put up your hand if you have a question. We can pause and we can help you address that. If your bandwidth gets slow, you just turn off your camera, or feel free to let us know how we can help. My name is Julie Duffield, and I'm here with my colleague Delphine Kwong. We are helping with the tech support here from Region 15 Worsted. We move forward. The next slide, we're part of, Rachel, would you like to do this slide?
Yes, I'll unmute myself. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Rachel Laganoff from the Region 15 CC. The Region 15 Comprehensive Center is one of 19 federally funded regional comprehensive centers. The comprehensive centers provide capacity building, technical assistance, content expertise, and resources to state education agencies. The Region 15 Comprehensive Center is collaborating with the Nevada Department of Education as thought partners on this project. And today I'm joined by my R15CC colleagues. I'm Julie Duffield and Delphine Kwong, who Julie just mentioned will be in the background monitoring the chat. So if you have any technical assistance questions, please type those into the chat. And we are very happy to be here today, collaborating with NDE to host this webinar. So now I'd like to introduce our presenters for today's webinar. The first presenter is Michelle Hennigan, who's an assistant principal at Chaparral High School in the Clark County School District. And also we have today Maria Cieslak, who's a professional development specialist at the Center for Applied Linguistics. So welcome, Michelle and Maria. We look forward to the presentation. Also joining us today are some staff from the Nevada Department of Education. Tina Statuki, an education programs professional. Janie Malorny, also an education programs professional for K-12 social studies and instructional materials in the Office of Standards and Instructional Support at the Nevada Department of Education. She will be monitoring the chat to answer any questions you have about social studies content. We also have with us Dr. Kulwati Axtell, who's the Title III and Migrant Education Programs Director. She will also be monitoring the chat, and she can respond to any questions related to English language development or English language learners. So with that, I will pass this on to Kul to introduce what we're going to be presenting to you today.
Thank you, Rachel. So first, I just like to it's more like a reminder for us. So why would we have ELD standard framework at our state? So then just so you know that our English learner, they don't belong to our EL specialists. Their education is shared for all educator, content teacher. As you know, we have every single classroom have English learner. And we would like to make sure they have access to rigorous and standard-based instruction. Next slide, please, Julie. Thank you. So again, the purpose of this webinar, we have, if some of you probably have attended our webinar, this is the part of the webinar series for ELD standard framework. We have the last one for social study. So the webinar designed for all content teachers, all educators for benefit or support our English learner and other diverse learners. Next slide, please. So here we just would like to know who with us today. Just select, for your role. So what you do at your school or district or your site. Excellent. So it looks like we have between classroom teacher and EL specialist just about, oh, now the classroom teacher beating up. Thank you, Julie. We had a pretty good group. We have classroom teachers and then English learner specialist and DPD staff and also some of our NDE staff. Pretty good group today. Thank you. So next slide will be, I would turn that over to one of our presenter, Maria. If you wouldn't mind to let us know agenda for today, please. Thank you.
Yes, of course. So before I get started, I do want to thank all of you for coming today, for taking the time out of your busy schedule to focus on the transformational teaching and learning in Nevada. Nevada teachers and administrators are so extraordinary because they are very diligently making that difference in all of our language learners' lives to help them to learn and to strive and in their academic careers, but also to thrive in our society. And as a former English learner myself and an educator, I do want to thank you, honestly, for all that you do. Our agenda today is going to address the following topics. First, we are going to start with the ELD guiding principles and make that connection in the ELD framework. Then we're going to be reviewing what the quality of learning for social studies looks like with an example from a sample lesson that we're going to share with you. And we're going to then talk about how we're going to apply that ELD standards framework in our day-to-day lesson planning. And finally, we are going to have a question and answer section at the end. However, throughout our session, we encourage you to ask questions and post your comments in the chat box, and we will be monitoring them and answering them as we go along as well. Okay, so Michelle is going to be talking about the ELD standards framework guiding principles. Oh, Michelle, oh, there you
go. Okay, sorry. No, I couldn't get my phone, my mic to unmute. I'm sorry about that. So today the ELD guiding principles focus around 5 main principles. All of these principles are a shared responsibility for us. And we should start with number 1, our students' assets. Our students' assets are what they really bring to the table and how we can leverage them. It is also connected to the NEPF. So if you are a Southern Nevada and use the NEPF, this would be standard 1. So they are both aligned hand in hand. So our students' assets are how we can leverage them. What do they bring to the table and what do they know? Then the robust standards are standard-based instruction, and this is for high cognitive demand. It's asking us what we can do with our students, how we can bring the most out in them. Then we have extended discourse. This is where we want to get our students collaborating and talking as much as they can, whether it's in their current native language or if it's in English, as long as they are collaborating and making the most out of their learning situation. Then we have metacognitive development. The metacognitive development is to get the metacognition so that they understand what they are learning and why they are learning it. Then we have, of course, our formative assessment practices. That is how we can assess our students without giving them a standardized test. Are they learning what they need to be learning to hit that standard? Those are the 5 guiding principles, and they go hand in hand with the NEPF, but they also stand alone on their own to guide us through each and every step of the ELD social studies framework. Next slide, please. The ELD standards framework has 5 guiding principles. Guiding principle number 1, you want to focus on the value of your learners' assets. Leverage these assets to accelerate their development and content proficiency. This way, your students are really learning what they need to know and why they are learning it. Guiding principle number 2 is robust grade level content standards-based instruction. We are going to take you through a scaffolded instruction today that I think you will really enjoy and want to use it right away in your classroom. Guiding principle number 3 is the use of multiple modalities. And we will be showing you that today as well, because not only is it written, it's oral, it's visual, it's kinesthetic, it's all of the above. And the lesson will show you, will detail that. Guiding principle number 4, next slide. Guiding principle number 4 provides teachers opportunities to develop the metacognition. This is through your purposeful planning. This is where you are going to develop your awareness as well as the students' awareness to show them how they can monitor and how you can monitor their progress for their own learning. How is their language coming along? How is their academic vocabulary coming? Are they understanding the bits and pieces, or are they finally grasping the overall picture? Guiding principle number 5 gives us our formative assessment. In formative assessment, you can use all kinds of tools. You can use scaffolded tools. Is that a piece that you could grade? Probably. A graphic organizer, or sentence structures, sentence frames. Our formative assessments give us not only a formal way, but also an informal way to assess our students. All right, next slide. Quality learning of social studies. We have 3 dimensions we're going to focus on today. We've got the conceptual focus, which is engaging our students. Today, we're going to take a look at the first principle of social studies. There are 6, and principle number 1 is creating compelling questions, and principle or practice number 2 is supporting questions. They go hand in hand. And in this lesson, we really want to show you the difference between the compelling question and the supporting question. Participation by design. This is your purposeful planning to engage your students. It gives you robust and maybe even emotion evoking situations and cognitive tasks that your students, it's going to make them think. It's going to get their juices flowing and spark those discussions that you want to have with them. And then the purposeful focus on language. This will be seen through the discipline of social studies. It will take you through the verbiage that you need with the students to integrate that standard into the lesson plan to be able to use the scaffolds. Next question, or next slide.
Fabulous. So what we're going to be doing is looking at the Nevada content, academic content standards and the C3 framework. And the C3 framework of talks about stands for, let's see what it is. Oh, here we go. It is the College, Career, and Civic Life Framework for Social Studies. It really helps to put this focus on how to spark curiosity, guide instruction, deepen the investigations around the different lessons and topics in social studies that students are going to be encountering throughout K-12 lessons. These happen to be the ones that we're focusing on today.
Okay, the C3 framework. Today we have pulled out 3 of the standards out of the, wait, oops, I'm sorry. I was reading Maria's slide. Go ahead, go to the next slide.
No, go right ahead. Yes, this is it.
Purpose of constructing the compelling question. The goal of constructing a compelling question is to evoke emotion and address a problem and issues or concerns in today's society. The purpose of the lesson is to reinforce language skills, develop claims, evaluate information gathered from multiple sources to support these claims. But most importantly, I want to connect it to the C3 framework. During this lesson, while we're constructing these compelling questions, there are 5 practices. The first practice will be to construct a compelling question. Then you will engage your students into some thought-provoking conversations to create a supporting question. Once you've created that supporting question, you're going to teach them how to gather evidence in annotating a lesson and annotating an article. Then after that, you're going to have them group together to learn how to create a question from what they have learned. So that is how we are tying the 6 practices of social studies into this lesson, and it ties straight into the guiding principles of the ELD framework. So next slide, please. There are 2 reasons why, or purposes why we use compelling questions. First, it must draw on the students' intellectual, what do I want to say, emotion. It needs to be intellectually meaty so that they can get thought-provoked, so that they can express their emotions and maybe have a discussion or even an argument. Compelling questions need to draw on multiple disciplines, which in turn provide scaffolds for their success. Secondly, a compelling question should be student-friendly, meaning the question reflects some quality or condition that students care about. And this respects their intellectual efforts as to their opinions. Next slide. This is a screenshot from Curriculum Engine. If you are in Southern Nevada, this is something that we use, and it's always nice to go into the bucket of what do I need to know, and it gives you samples. So it gives you samples of what a compelling question would look like and what the supporting questions look like. All right, next slide. Now, the process for outlining a purposely planned lesson is you've got 3 basic steps. You should first establish linguistic and contextual purpose that infuses the social studies practices that I just talked about, because there are 6 of them. The 6 again are the constructing the compelling, creating a supporting question, giving the students guidelines for gathering evidence, then moving into maybe even communication skills, and then again engaging in an argument or a social debate. This is all to help activate and build prior knowledge, or to build a background that they may have had a misconception on. The application of this and extension activities at the end will enable you to take all of these further, so that the students can maybe go deeper into a subject that they may want to understand. So there's 3 basics. The basics are A, purposely plan into the practices. B, activate their prior knowledge and clear up misconceptions. And C, be able to create and apply their understanding at the end. Next slide. So scaffolding throughout the lesson. Establish linguistic and contextual purpose that infuses the social studies practices and necessary language practices required for the lesson. That is getting all of the academic language that the students need, understanding the vocabulary, understanding the meaning, circling the vocabulary, highlighting the vocabulary, discussing it, referring to it. Then you need to activate their prior knowledge and maybe even evoke some misconceptions and discuss those misconceptions. Create extension activities that will enable students to apply their understanding, and offer devised scaffolding. And what I mean by devised scaffolding is when we are scaffolding, there's some really good tools out there that you can integrate into almost every lesson to help further the students' understanding. And some examples of those are visuals, realia, modeling with gestures, connecting to background knowledge in a prior discussion, graphic organizers, sentence starters or formulaic expressions, maybe even a word wall, put a word wall, a read aloud, or if you don't want to do a read aloud, do an annotated article so that they can discuss the end questions. Intentional small grouping, you could take them from a pair or to a quad or to a whole group. That is intentional planning. And last but not least, Encourage the use of first language if it helps them deepen their understanding. Next lesson. Thank you. Language routines.
Yes, so we're now going to talk about language routines. And when we're thinking about this, we're thinking about the disciplinary practices of social studies, that these language routines are reflective and collaborative processes, meaning that language routines in social studies supports sense making. Questioning is key to student learning about the world, events, economics, geography, and history. Students are communicating both in their writing and in conversations about civic life. Cultivating conversations is at the forefront of being deliberate with other people about how to define and address issues. And so this is part of that process. Language routines in social studies help students organize their thoughts in a safe environment with others and correct those misconceptions, as Michelle stated, about a concept, and actually move them forward in understanding what it is to be that active and responsible 21st century citizen. Next slide. So now we're going to move into an actual scenario, and we're going to be taking a look at a middle school grade classroom, grade 6 to 8, who have a wide variety of knowledge and skills already they already had some beginning lessons on how to construct a compelling question and create and respond to supporting questions. And the class also has a variety of English learners at different proficiency levels, from levels 2 to 4 on the WIDA Access assessment. Okay, so some other things to keep in mind. Again, this is our pretend scenario. This classroom has, the teacher already has some instructional routines in place, which include students knowing how to move into partnerships, work with a partner, and in small groups. The teacher already has explicitly taught how to paraphrase and clarify, support, and build on each other's ideas when they're in small group discussions. And the teacher already introduced how to construct a compelling question as a whole group, and to distinguish between what is the difference between a compelling and supporting question. So this is not the first lesson that they're going to be having about compelling questions, but a continuation of where they left off at previously. Okay, so Michelle is going to explain now the lesson in its full little sequence, and then I'll go into how to use the ELD framework in response to the lesson.
So we're going to start off by how to get this off with a positive start. Again, like Maria said, this is our scenario that we have already established some structures and routines with our students. And those structures and routines are important to be able to follow through with some more advanced scaffolding techniques. So during a gallery walk, what you would do is you would post around either explicit multiple text or images that are going to create and evoke emotion. You don't want something complacent like a picture of a bee, nice bee. You want something to really truly evoke the emotion of your students. You can use this strategy when you want your students to be able to discuss it after they've viewed these images. So there you are using some realia and some multimedia. Because this strategy requires students to physically move around the room, it's going to be engaging for your kinesthetic learners. Also, you can use this strategy when you want them to work with pairs or small groups and then whole group. So you could scaffold the grouping. You'll be able to start with a pair, move to a quad, and then move to whole class discussion. Because this strategy is a little time consuming, it's very purposeful in your planning, and it hits one of the higher standards, especially in the NEPF. So it begins with your gallery walk. Like I said, evoke emotion. Make sure that it's school appropriate and make sure that it's going to be something that the students will want to talk about. when you open this activity, when I was still in the classroom, I loved to open a unit with it, meet it again in the middle, and then meet it again at the end and see how the students' thoughts and opinions and differences changed over the course of the unit. To create a compelling question, we're going to structure small group discussions to include format and language. And this is a 1 to 2 day lesson to get the full extent of a gallery walk. Next slide. So when considering building on this gallery walk, I would like to start with one of the questions that came out of the Social Studies C3 framework for the world geography and global studies. It was number 20. And it's, why did the Southern states feel that the Black codes were necessary? That is a big question, but it will evoke emotion. And this is the end point where you want your students to get to. And when you're developing these, I would use, if it were me, I would use old pictures, because this was based around slavery. This was based around things that still today create a lot of emotion. And it's funny, when we were working on this, we did not realize how relevant it would be today when we started this program 3 years ago. So I want to explain to you why this works, because it signals a continuing argument about how to interpret the injustice of oppression in the modern world, as well as individual and group resistant movements for social justice, which have developed in response. We still have these types of issues creating talk within our communities today, just as they did like 100 years ago. And although this sounds like a straight out history question, it has a range of disciplinary lenses. What I mean is it suppression? Is it economics? Is it social? Is it all of it above? Is it going to evoke emotion in your students? For the students, this compelling question should create an interest and a feeling of challenge, so that the reluctant students can think, maybe I do want to engage in this conversation. Maybe it's my time to be heard. So make sure you have your guidelines in place for this when you're ready to roll. Next slide. So in this picture, I am depicting 2 different scenarios. And the reason why I like to use this is the top picture is a high school classroom where the students, during their gallery walk, they viewed the images and posted their stickies. Remember, during your initial opening of a gallery walk, there should be no discussion. Students are only writing their own thoughts and views on their stickies. The bottom picture was where my daughter, I want to show you this because my daughter did this with her 2nd graders. And she said, Mom, it was the best activity I have done with them, because I got more conversation and more metacognition out of them than I have in months. And now she uses this technique at least once a week. So can you do it with lower grades? Of course you can, but you need to remember, you need to really establish your structures and systems for this. So during this gallery walk, they're going to explore an enduring issue and concern. So at the top one, when this was done, it was a discussion over, should the NFL be able to kneel during the Star Spangled Banner? It was emotion. It was still an enduring issue. So it was a concern, and we ended up taking this probably 4 or 5 days longer, because the students enjoyed it and we kept discussing it, and we ended up being able to finally get to the 6th step in the social studies practices, where it's how could you take action? and they started writing letters to it to different places and expressing their emotions. So step 1, view the images posted on the walls. Step 2, remember there's no discussion. Step 3, think about the images pro te. What do you notice? What do you wonder? And write it on your sticky note. Next slide, please. After you are done with your gallery walk, this is where the students have time to reflect. It's called, instead of think, pair, share, you're going to ink, pair, share. And what you're going to do is your students are going to write down their conclusions and their thoughts and ideas about what they noticed and what they wondered. Once they are finished with their notice and wonder, where they're self-reflecting, then they are going to talk to a partner. This is where you're going to get a small group, one-on-one. What did you write? What did you notice? What did you wonder? And then in order to get some discourse going within the classroom, what you would do is you would have one student share what the other student said and draw upon a conclusion. All right. After the think, ink, share, you are going to build upon what they need to know. You are going to build their background knowledge and maybe clear up some misconceptions. Next slide. And in doing that, you could do either a read aloud and model annotating, or if you have already accomplished this with your students, you could just put up your reminders or a anchor chart on how to remember how to annotate. So you would give them an article and have them star the important ideas, give an explanation point for a wow, circle vocabulary words that they either know or don't know or both, and put a question mark for what they don't understand or if that could have been a misconception. At the end, they would answer the comprehension questions on their own before they discussed it with their partner. Next slide. This is an example of the article, and I have shared with you 3 different links, and they're going to put those into the chat. This is an 8-day lesson for 6th through 8th, and these are some of the thought-provoking images that could be put up. It's showing slavery, it's showing cotton fields, it's showing malnutrition, and some different things, and why the Black codes were developed to invoke that raw emotion from your students. This article that's right here is it's kind of lengthy, and this is a lesson plan overview that I'm showing you, and the article is embedded at the end, and it talks about a lot of things that the African American culture went through during the rise of the Black codes. So in the links, I'm giving you an 8-day lesson plan. I'm also sharing with you the worksheets for later if you would like to do an extended article with a jigsaw, as well as 6 videos on Black codes. Next slide. Once you are done with your annotated article or sharing videos, you can move on to a think, pair, square, which is the same concept as an ink, pair, share, but this time, instead of exchanging information with one student to one student, you're going to grab another pair, and so your pair becomes 4. So that's why it's a square. You will review your annotated article independently, review your notes, share your thoughts and ideas with your partner, and then reflect on those. Once you've reflected on your annotated notes, you will then pair up with the other partner and share your information, and then you will start working on your first compelling question. Once the students have gathered their background knowledge, they'll be able to start sharing their thoughts and ideas, and this is at the time when they first create what question is evoking out of these pictures. What question is enduring, what is still happening today that could have been happening back then. Next slide. The third step is each group shares with the whole class. Once each group has shared with the whole class, you could write these down. You could have a student note taker, however your system and structures are in place. But once you've completed that, you would take the students into a debate. This is where you could have students just debate out to build upon or create that compelling question. You could maybe do a mini Socratic seminar if you've gotten that far, or you could divide the class in half, say students against or students with on each side of the class. But this is where you're going to get your meat from your students on the compelling question. Once you've built it, you should be able to address just what the enduring issue and concerns were at the beginning from the gallery walk. At this time, we are going to talk about the last 3 little steps we did. Please respond. And why did we do this? Why did we start with a gallery walk, move to ink pair share, and then move to a ink pair squared? What is the rationalization for this? Please share in the chat your thoughts and ideas.
Michelle, lots of things getting posted in the chat.
Yes. And the compelling questions are questions that are deep thought provoking and cannot. Compelling questions, gallery walk, yes. Primary sources and secondary sources are important with realia. Yes, they are. Julie. Creating comfort with the materials and other students in the class. Yes, these are all wonderful. And it all ties it into summarizing and synthesizing. This allows your students to build cognitive and linguistic complexity. Not only are they using the language, but they're getting a higher cognitive demand. Yes, multiple opportunities for language and communicate, allow students. Great job, everybody. Yes. All right, next slide, please. On this slide, we wanted to share with you the extensions. We have provided for you several links for the extensions as well. And this is going to take you into several more videos and several more articles. You could, with these extensions, you could view the short videos about the origins of the Black codes and why they started. And do we have anything like that still in place today? Analyze the Black codes during the Civil War and then after the Civil War. And some of the ways you could do this, you could either do an interactive notebook, you could do a lecture, and then at the end, of course, summarize and analyze. And then if you finally can get to the 6th practice, that would be to take action. What kind of action could you take at the end with your extension? All right, next slide. So, quality of learning of social studies, the gallery walk. What was the purpose? It sets the purpose to create the compelling question. It activates their prior knowledge and maybe lets the teacher be informed of misconceptions that maybe need to be addressed. During the ink pair share, this sets their thinking up for generating a compelling question. Afterwards, we read and annotated an article. This determines the enduring issue, concern, or debate and supports the sense making. It raises that bar for their cognition. Lastly, the think, pair, share is the final goal, to create the compelling question and evoke that emotion. Next slide. How do these activities support meaningful discourse? It's all centered around guiding principle number 3. The teacher provides frequent opportunities for the students to engage in extended discourse through multiple modalities. During this lesson, we used multiple modalities. They were up, they were moving around the room. We used realia, we used notepads, we used sticky pads, and they had conversations. This was all included in oral, written, visual, and kinesthetic modes of communication focused on developing students' contents, understandings, language, and analytical thinking. Respond in your chat. What is your, look back at the activity. Is this something you think you could incorporate? Respond in the chat. We'll give you 30 seconds and then we'll move on to the next slide. Yes, thank you all for sharing. Equity and accountability, boost confidence level. Thank you all for sharing in the chat. Yes, you can use the topic, but not with, yes, the activities, but not with the topic. This was the topic that we pulled out of the C3 framework. Pick your own, for sure. All right, let's go ahead and hand it over to Maria.
All right, so now let's move into the Nevada ELD standards framework, which is very comprehensive, meaning that in Nevada, we really created a framework that concentrated on 4 content areas: English language arts, social studies, math, and science. And since today we were focusing on social studies, we would easily be able to go on the website, the Nevada Department of Education website, click on the ELD framework, go directly to the grade band, because these are also in specific grade bands, which is very unique when it comes to these type of frameworks, because we have something for kindergarten to 2nd grade, very different for 3rd through 5th grade. That progression continues for 6th through 8th and 9th through 12th. So we really are truly following what the new WIDO Refresh 2020 standards are talking about, that there is a progression, language progression that students will be taking. And we're also connecting it to the disciplinary practices. So even though we're doing social studies today, for example, Michelle mentioned that we're crossing over the disciplines. So perhaps our topic might be social studies. We might want to look at other documents as well in math or science or English language arts that will help support our students as well, depending on the topic that we have. Next slide. So as we mentioned today, we were working on that ELD framework for developing the language of social studies, grades 6 to 8. So it's very easy just to download what grade band that you have, what content area you are teaching, to get a reflective practice on how to support our language learners. So let's look at the next slide and go into greater detail. Once you open up the document, you'll see that there's a table of contents and there are 3 sections. The first section is a general overview and gives you the purpose and the connection to the key uses of language. The second section describes the student moves and the teacher moves, and we'll get into that a little bit more, dive into that a little bit closely in the next couple of slides. And then the third section really focuses on the social studies practices, and we have explanations on those connection to the key uses of language that we are using for when we're reflecting about the language practices of students in our classrooms. Okay, so we're going to move to the next slide. So let's take a look at what's the difference between student moves and teacher moves, right? And so 2A talks about the language expectations. What are students doing and showing to process and produce language. Then the second one is talking about teacher moves. What are those instructional practices, those instructional procedures and techniques that teachers will use to help support our language learners as they process and produce language? And then again, reflecting back on the NEPF and that strong emphasis on the collaboration that students need to do in the content areas, we also have a section there that helps teachers think about how are they supporting the collaboration in the academic language of social studies in this example. So let's move to the next slide. So when Michelle was going over the lesson example, this is a great document either to use before when you're planning a lesson, or also reflecting on the next steps of continuing the lesson. So for example, for student moves, and we're gonna look at the middle. What's nice about the document is that we are thinking about our students' proficiency level at the beginning level, intermediate level, and advanced level. And of course, we know that our students, the levels that are presented on their WIDA access score is just a snapshot. And so they're always movement and flowing to the next level, right? And so when we were thinking about our Think, Pair, Share and our gallery walk, let's take a look at the middle column over here. And we can see, for example, that students were really identifying the main ideas and details in oral discourse. Yes, that's exactly how we were supporting our students. Now, if we're thinking about our advanced learners, we're going to move to the third column, the column to the right, and then we're going to see if any of these supports were met during the lesson, or maybe we can think about how we could have changed some things, right? And so maybe identifying how text structures support comprehension. Maybe we could have gone a little bit deeper when it was time to annotate, because Michelle was saying that our third activity was to read and annotate a couple different articles that students were going to read. So maybe we were approaching that area, and next time, perhaps when we're moving on to the next lesson, I would definitely be looking at those supports. Now let's take a look at our newcomers or our beginning level students. Oh, let's go backward just a second for listening and reading. And so over here, is there anything that we touched upon? And perhaps identifying responses to who questions on charts and illustrated text. You know, they were a respondent, but now that I'm thinking about it, there were texts actually, there were illustrations because of the gallery walk. So yes, we've met the needs of our students in that input of content that they were receiving and that language input. So let's move to the next slide. So the next part of the document talks about the production of speaking and writing. And we can do the same kind of reflection questions. Did we go in the middle first and intermediate? Because most of the time our students are at the intermediate level. And so we can see, how did we do this? Were students connecting ideas? Yes, they were definitely doing that. But did we focus on using transitions? I'm not quite clear if we did that. So now I know my next step for my next lesson, I will help students connect those ideas, but using connective transitional words. And then we would do the same kind of reflection extending, for bridging and reaching students. They were engaging in extended discussions about the events related to the topic idea. Yes, we were moving all of our students in that direction. And then when I go to the left, I can see students were able to answer simple questions related to claims. Definitely, they were doing that during the gallery walk. They were doing that during the Think, Pair, Share, and when they were annotating their article as well. And so now I can see where I was able to meet my students in all three different levels. When we go to the next slide, we can use this document also to be thinking about teacher moves. How do we support the processing and production of language? And so now I'm going to be looking over here, building background. Students were building background because they were sharing information with multiple partners. They were, they were required to use the academic language. They were tapping into their background knowledge with what do they know. when I'm moving to the right side, were the teachers, as a teacher, was I using complex sentence structures? You know what? I didn't really see that, but I'm going to have to help my students use higher level sophisticated language. So I'm going to be very intentional next time on creating those academic sentence frames using those transition words that we were talking about producing before. And then when I'm taking a look at the left, I'm seeing, oh, you know what, picture walk. Yes, they were doing that type of a picture walk during the gallery walk, but did I make that connection perhaps during the article? And maybe I'm like, maybe I didn't take that step. So next time that we're reading an article, I'll preview with my students, taking them through the captions and illustrations of that article or the bold print so that they can really prepare themselves for reading and annotating the text that was provided. So this is a way for us to use in planning a lesson, but also in reflecting about our practices to prepare for the next lesson, right? Because we're always thinking about that next lesson and how do we move our students forward in their content knowledge, but also in their language processing the language, and then in producing language as well, because we have two goals for our language learners always, and it's that simultaneous development of content and language. So let's move to the next slide. Collaborating. Yes. And so again, here we're going to be looking to see, did we meet our students at the entering level, the beginning level, intermediate, and bridging? And so we can see, oh, look, on the left, we have think, pair, share squared. Yes, we met the goal for our beginning students. We were engaging our students in whole group discussions, definitely very appropriate when we're developing compelling questions, because they're not quite there yet. In high school, they're able to create those compelling questions on their own, but not in middle school yet. We're still helping them do that. And so we're going to be using those small groups and whole group discussions. And then definitely when we go to the right-hand side, we see that there were structured pair work throughout the process, even for our advanced learners. So again, this document, this framework really is a helpful guide, one to check how we're moving all of our students in their proficiency levels. All right, next slide. Okay. So Michelle's going to take us to look back at all of the teacher moves and those connections that we were talking about with the framework.
So when we're building upon our activities and moving from one purposefully planned activity to the next, we need to take into account, do our teacher moves match our student moves? Are they producing what we want them to produce? So during the gallery walk, even though in the beginning it's independent, it becomes a structured pair work to share experience. Were the student moves what we wanted? Students were listening, they were speaking and reporting a partner's ideas. In the ink pair share, it's structured small group in order to chunk and separate the structure for building the questions. What did the students do? They identified what the compelling question is. They created supporting questions that addressed the enduring issue and concerns. The teacher moved when we read and annotated the article. Yes, they were still doing independent work, but in the end, it was two types of structured small group work. We started with our pairs, and then we eventually moved to the 4. What happens during the student moves? We offered ideas. We compared ideas. They drew conclusions. They cleared up some misconceptions, and it supported their sense making for a higher cognitive development. The think pair squared, yes, structured pair work to guide students to understand the difference between a compelling question and a supporting question. We discussed thoughts, ideas, and after annotating the article, we build upon cognitive and linguistic complexity. Next slide. Purposeful planning. Think of a lesson you have observed in which you have provided language supports and opportunities for the students to collaborate. What are the lesson learning objectives? What did you want the students to learn were you able to do it? So in interest of time, we're going to skip the chat this time. So next slide. Focus on social studies practices. This is where we wrap it up. How does the sequence of activities above provide English learners with opportunities to engage in the social studies practices strategically? So remember, the practices are: 1, create a compelling question; 2, create supporting questions; 3, gather information, build background knowledge; 4, use evidence. That would have been out of your article. 5, communicate, argue, critique; and 6, take it to the next level so that the students can take action. Did we do this? What additional supports could they maybe use? Maria covered that in maybe doing the transitional words. Do we need to hit base with more sentence frames, or can we pull those out? All right, next slide. So we're going to talk about how we did this in constructing compelling questions. The teacher moves. In the middle, what did we use? We did text with picture support for students to elaborate on acquired knowledge. We provided sufficient wait time to allow students to formulate ideas and questions. So we used both of those. So over to the left, what is something that we do for the entering? We provided academic vocabulary during the inquiry process. So the students were able to understand and use some of their vocabulary. Over to the left, or over to the right. Oh yes, we provided explicit attention to, oh, sorry, I lost my thought.
Students
Explicitly
reporting
model orally the academic language. Sorry about that.
We did several different things there. Yes.
Yes, we did. So next slide. So was this successful? The successful criteria for practice 1, constructing compelling questions, and entering student. Students will be able to construct a compelling question based upon disciplinary concepts. Students will be able to evaluate various. Did they do that? Yes, they did. How about developing and expanding? Were students able to evaluate various interpretations? Were they able to understand that article they interpreted? Did they annotate it? Did they understand it? Were they able to build upon their knowledge or clear up misconceptions? And then finally, in the end, the students were able to construct that compelling question to support their supporting questions. Next slide. And here are all of your resources. There's an 8-day lesson plan. There's articles on compelling questions. There's articles on Black codes, articles for extension activities, and there's like 6 articles in that activity with also instructions for 3 different types of jigsaws, and then of course the videos on the Black codes. Do we have any questions? Maria, do you want to bring it on home with any questions and wrap it up?
I don't see any questions so far, but I know that we do have a survey, and there was one comment that they enjoyed the session. That was very informative, and so we just want to remind you that the Nevada Department of Education is there as a resource for each and every teacher and instructional coach and administrator when to further discuss and provide that professional development support as well on the topic of language learners. So definitely go to the website, contact all of your administrators. Feel free to share this with other educators and administrators in your schools and your districts. Thank you so much for participating.
Yes, thank you so much for participating. And in the chat is the link to the Nevada Department Ed for on-demand, for all of them, for the math, the science, the English. So if you want to share that with your school or your departments, everybody can go back and view these videos so that they can understand the ELD framework as well.
And please, before you leave, we posted the link to the survey in the chat. We value your feedback. This will help us with future planning for professional learning in the state around the ELD standards framework and the ELD standards framework for social studies. So please fill out the survey. We really appreciate your feedback. And thank you for attending as well.
Thank you so much.
Everybody have a great evening.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Marie.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.